This steady loss of industrial land is going to reach a critical point where the economy simply can no longer grow.
We have to look at ways of using the space that we do have in a much more efficient way.
We've eliminated 10,000 round trips, which equates to about 300 tons of less emissions.
Hi, I'm Dagmar Timmer.
And I'm Vanessa Timmer, and this is the Sustainable Region. Today we're examining the future of Metro Vancouver's industrial lands.
This trail leads through a Richmond industrial area that focuses on manufacturing and distribution. We're starting here on the south end, near Cambie Road.
Industries play an integral role in our region's economy, but in all of Greater Vancouver, only 4% of the land base is zoned as industrial.
Metro Vancouver is currently working to ensure that there is enough land for industrial uses, both today and into the future. Industrial businesses have specific needs. For example, they need access to a variety of transportation routes. Noise shouldn't impact residents. And when business is booming, they need room to grow.
Our first story outlines the role of industrial lands in Greater Vancouver and the challenges that lie ahead. Office, retail, and industry are the key building blocks of our region's economy. Across Metro Vancouver, 340,000 people work on lands dedicated to industry. That's 28% of the region's workforce.
We need a healthy industrial land base and a healthy industrial sector. There are all kinds of activities, manufacturing to some extent, certainly repair, certainly distribution, certainly storage, that are very vital to our economy. They support all the other activities in this great region. And that's why we've got to keep those lands safe so that we can maintain those activities that support the whole regional economy.
3.5% of Metro Vancouver's land base is designated as industrial land. These lands depend on transportation access points such as highways, railways, and waterways to function. Every community in the region depends on their industrial lands to service local economies. And it is this interplay of industrial land, transportation, and our position on the Pacific Rim that makes us a gateway for international trade. The recent opening of 3 new berths at Delta Port in Tsawwassen is a sign of our region's economic health.
The proximity of the port to other industrial lands is also really critical. It's not just land at the waterfront, but it's also land near the waterfront, near the port facilities that allow all the things like the transfer of goods out of containers, the transfer of export goods into containers, the operations of the supply chain, the movements between road and rail to take place.
Industrial lands such as Port Kells in Surrey and Langley, or East Tilbury in Delta, are home to a wide range of industry. From the manufacturing of wheels for automotive giant Toyota to the small but bustling company Preform Construction, industrial land provides the space and zoning necessary for the distribution and manufacturing sectors.
We need to have access to our client base as well as to our suppliers. And if it's not within striking distance of Greater Vancouver, we run the risk of not being competitive.
An important goal in the regional growth strategy is to support a sustainable economy. Maintaining a healthy industrial land base is the objective of the Industrial Land Strategy, which encourages the type of development needed to sustain a diverse economy.
We did a comprehensive inventory of all the industrial land in the region, and to our best estimate, we think we have about 10 to 15 years of supply. So we're forecasting a shortage after 10 or 15 years.
There are 2 trends affecting this projected shortage. The region is growing, with 3.4 million people expected to be calling Metro Vancouver home by 2040. But the second, more worrisome trend is the loss of our industrial land base through conversion to other uses. It's something Preform Construction has experienced firsthand.
The problem that we ran into was encroaching residential development. So, all the industrial parks that we saw typically had building sites beside them. So there was a risk that they were going to be developed.
The reason why it's attractive for municipalities to rezone land from industry to another use is that the industrial land has a low land value. And so when they can rezone it to residential or to retail or office, the land value is being increased, and the amount of floor space that's being built is often more than an industrial, which is often just one story, and lots of outdoor storage and so on. So they see a property tax gain by moving from industrial to other uses. It's generally to get the property tax increase.
Our region's land base is already in limited supply. Our geography, the U.S. border, and the agricultural land reserve mean we have a finite amount of industrial land to work with. Each year, Metro Vancouver's industrial land base is diminished through conversions to other uses such as office, retail, or residential.
If we look back over the last 30 years, there's been a steady erosion of the industrial land bank. This steady loss of industrial land is going to reach a critical point sometime in the foreseeable future, where the economy simply can no longer grow, because while there is still land for people to live on, there's no longer land for them to actually work on.
When industrial lands are converted to other uses, there is a direct impact on the bottom line for industrial businesses through increased land prices and increased difficulty in serving their customers. Making it harder for local businesses to be competitive in our globalized economy is bad for our regional economy. It slows job growth and discourages new businesses from locating in Metro Vancouver. But the impact on our region goes far beyond the economy. It affects our ability to shape growth in a sustainable manner.
If we start to displace the industrial land from the lands which are designated for industry, they're looking for a place to go. And they'll put pressure on our agricultural lands, because some agricultural lands are better located for those industrial activities in terms of proximity to the centre of the city. At the same time, if they are forced out into the suburbs, it's a longer journey to work, both for the people who are then going to those industrial lands, and in fact, if they're displaced with offices, then the people who are going to the former industrial lands also have a longer journey to work, not by transit, rather than going to the town centres. So it really has a negative effect all around.
Because industrial lands are cheaper than urban centres, using these lands for office parks or retail can mean lower costs and higher rental income for landowners, and higher property tax revenues for municipalities. But this pulls offices out of our urban centres, undermining the development of these centres as a focus for community activities and services. It also undermines the development of efficient transit systems. For office employees in business parks, this means longer and more difficult commute times, and that in turn means increased pollution and congestion on our roads. For our transit system, this means dispersed routes and services instead of more focused and frequent service to jobs in urban centres.
The regional strategy is to try to steer these jobs into centres where there can be more people can take transit and walk to work, and leave the industrial land for those types of uses that have to be there.
The importance of industrial lands is so great that the call for a formal way to protect them is increasing. Port Metro Vancouver is one of the voices seeking an approach that will preserve this vital land base.
Things like the regional growth strategy, clearly considering industrial land as a critical use of land that needs to be planned for, are good first steps. And I would hope that with everybody coming together around that common strategy, we can achieve what we need to in that way. But ultimately, it may come down to regulation.
The challenge is to balance regional and municipal interests.
From a local interest point of view, the replacement of industry is sometimes quite attractive. And from a regional point of view, it has all these other kinds of problems. We have to work very closely with the municipalities, trying to get that framework that is sufficiently flexible to adapt to municipal needs, but sufficiently firm and definite in place that it really does impose a level playing field on all the municipalities.
Welcome back. We're in Richmond, one of Metro Vancouver's leaders in terms of land designated for industrial uses. We're on the Bath Slough Trail, a 1.5 km trail that has the slough on one side and industrial warehouses on the other. Jobs on industrial land account for 28% of Metro Vancouver's workforce, and these days technological innovation is a big part of the picture.
Logistics or supply chain is all about how product gets from the maker of the product to the consumer's hands. And the business of the supply chain is all about minimizing costs, operating in the absolute most efficient possible way. The ability to buy what you need, so you have the minimum amount of inventory on hand, has become a much more precise science. And it's driven by primarily mathematical models, and the ability to computerize those models and crunch a lot of numbers. It really drives a lot of very sophisticated algorithms that puts in the buyer's hands the ability to somewhat predict demand of different products. And it has become a much more precise science. There's a number of cost drivers that have caused us to be much more productive and efficient in the use of space. As industrial space has become much more scarce, it's impacted us in a number of ways. We just can't expand. The cost to expand has totally changed the numbers. And so we have to look at ways of using the space that we do have in a much more efficient way. Most of the area of Richmond, for example, is built on sand and silt left over from the Fraser River. Well, that prevents us from having a building that goes much higher than it is today. For example, there's buildings around the world that use racking technology that's as high as 100 feet tall. In this lower mainland area, we couldn't do that because of the threat of earthquake. Within that workspace, it starts to direct them via voice to go to a certain location, aisle, and product to pick a certain quantity. And if we've set up the system correctly, the employee is simply working their way down an aisle, so they're not traveling long distances between picked spots. A classic warehouse would pick products off a shelf to a skid and carry that skid around the warehouse and put it on a truck. And a fairly productive worker would pick about 100 picks an hour doing that. In a technology like this, a worker can pick around 500 picks an hour. In terms of space productivity, it's about triple what it would be in the traditional environment. To give you a general example, the products that sit in here that used to sit in about 12,000 square feet, we have triple the amount of products in about 6,000 square feet. So it's a very much more productive use of space. Good environmental and sustainability decisions are also often good economic decisions. The densification caused by land shortage is also something that causes us to recheck how we're doing things, become more efficient, which ultimately benefits the consumer because we're not adding cost to the supply chain. So the areas of sustainability and environmental stewardship, business efficiency, all can coexist together quite easily because none can exist without the other.
Welcome back to our look at industrial lands in Metro Vancouver. Designating land for industrial uses is a process that requires a great deal of vision by many people. It starts with public consultations and large scope plans like this one, Metro Vancouver's Regional Growth Strategy. Within that regional context, each municipality looks at its own strengths and challenges and develops community development plans like this one from Richmond. Looking ahead 30 years is routine work for regional planners, and one thing they're going to be looking at is how to move people and goods in a future that no longer has access to cheap fossil fuels.
We've got a transportation system that cannot function without oil.
Dr. Anthony Pearl thinks it's time for a revolution. He's the author of Transport Revolutions, Moving People and Freight Without Oil.
Burrard Inlet has pretty much the biggest cross-section of motorized mobility that you'd find in any major city in Canada. You have everything from seaplanes to ocean-going container vessels, cruise ships, and in the distance, of course, you even see the jet aircraft coming from YVR. The one thing that all of this diversity had in common is that it's all fueled by oil. A lot of what we take for granted now involves long trips for us and for our goods on very energy-intensive modes of transportation. Transportation is almost entirely dependent on oil as a fuel, and it's the single biggest user of oil in the world.
Infrastructure built today will need to serve us in a future that's short of energy.
Well, I'd like to talk about the combination of peak oil and climate change being the global energy transition. So what we're engaged in is a decades-long transition away from cheap oil and gas. We need to figure out how do we make it so that we can move people, we can move goods, we can grow food, we can make products, all of these things with less and less oil going forward. We need to first acknowledge peak oil as a real and profoundly important influence on how we do our planning.
High prices of oil could cause 4 types of transport revolutions. Electric motors will replace internal combustion engines. Electric vehicles will be grid-powered by rail or wires. Marine transport will utilize wind power. Air travel and air freight will decline.
At some point, people will be looking for alternative technology and alternative fuel sources, and there's a few of them that are more promising than others.
According to Dr. Pearl, the only thing that's ready for prime time are electric motors.
Vancouver already has the seeds of an electric transportation alternative. Electricity can be generated by many different energy sources. Oil is not required at all.
I mean, at the moment, oil is something like 98% of our transport system, and we're going to have to start to shift that. That's going to mean starting with hybrid cars, electric transit, electric rail freight.
Building more transport infrastructure that's designed for oil-intensive modes like SUVs, aircraft, that's just going to be obsolete by the time it comes into use. So new highways, airport expansions, we have to have the courage to pull the plug on those and redesign to provide mobility, but to provide mobility that won't require oil-based transportation.
We can't afford to replace a lot of this highway-oriented infrastructure that we built over the last 40 years. This is both a real opportunity, but it's also going to be a real challenge because we're so used to just growing.
So we're going to need political leaders who feel like they can get elected and stay elected if they take some of these choices. And I think individuals, need to support whichever parties or political organizations they feel will move that forward.
You're watching The Sustainable Region, and today's show is about industrial zoned land in Metro Vancouver. We're here at the north end of our Richmond Walk, where the Bath Slough empties into the Fraser River just across the street. The Fraser River was the original travel route for pioneers and First Nations. Over the years, it's earned the title, the Working River. Our next story looks at a way to combine wheels and water to move goods.
The Fraser River. Industry has used it for decades to transport things like sand and sawdust. But with tractor trailers and container trucks clogging our streets and polluting our air, short sea shipping aims to turn the Fraser into a marine highway, moving merchandise as well as sawdust up and down the waterway. River barges are already being used to ferry goods along the American seaboard and parts of the St. Lawrence Seaway. It's especially popular in Europe, where truck congestion is even worse. Will we see the same thing here?
Clearly carrying 100 or 200 containers on board a barge being pulled by one tug is a lot more environmentally friendly than 200 tractor trailer loads going up the highway.
Neil Milbank has written an industry-sponsored report, and his findings are impressive. A tractor trailer can travel 12 kilometers on a liter of fuel. A locomotive can travel 60 kilometers, and a barge can travel 86. A tug pushing a barge with 200 containers on it emits up to 40% less carbon dioxide than if those containers were on the road. Given these figures, industry would like to see containers from our deepwater ports like Delta Port ferried by barge to distribution points up the Fraser.
The barge short sea shipping operation or container barge operation would pick up the containers at those primary docks and act as a feeder service, much like the trucking companies do, to move those containers to other facilities where they will be unloaded, perhaps loaded, to be moved to the interior of the US or to Eastern Canada.
This company runs a daily freight service between Vancouver Island and the mainland. It moves trailers to and from its customers' warehouses on the Fraser River, and it knows from experience how barging can save in fuel and driving time.
Used to go from Duke Point to Tsawwassen. By bringing the barge further up the river, about 14 nautical miles, we've placed our customers' freight much closer to its destination. We've eliminated 10,000 round trips, which is about 20,000 one-way trips, which equates to about 300 tons of less emissions.
If companies like this can grow and carry containers as well as trailers, they can make a substantial impact on our roads.
I can give you an example. The barge we're standing on could probably hold about 250 containers. That's 250 trips up the river, 250 trips down the river. With that kind of utilization, 75–80% utilization of the barge deck, I think we could knock off 30% of the current trucking rate.
Short sea shipping doesn't eliminate truck traffic, it reduces it. Other countries report a reduction of between 20 and 30%. But barging in BC on a large scale isn't a reality yet. Alan Domas manages the Fraser River Port Authority. He says transfer points, called nodes, are key components of the plan.
We think Pitt Meadows with the Vancouver Intermodal Facility up by CP Rail as a critical piece that should have a node. We think Surrey should have a node higher up, close to CN's intermodal facility.
Nodes bring all forms of transportation, road, rail, and water together in one central hub. That's what makes the European model so successful. Here in BC, we can transport trailers as far as Surrey, but to take them further upriver and to expand the service into containers would require upgrading existing sites or building new ones. And that would involve various levels of government.
We are seeing the GVRD working on their growth management strategy. This is clearly an issue that fits with growth management. This is management of traffic, it's management of cargo, it's management of the industrial lands that are rapidly diminishing.
And another complication. Using barges to move hundreds of thousands of tons of goods up and down a river like they do in Europe is a new concept that to many stakeholders remains untested.
There's logistics companies, there's shipping lines, there's trucking companies, there's railways, there's terminal operators, there's port authorities, there's labor unions.
Nevertheless, the shipping industry would like to press ahead. It says short sea shipping can save time and money.
For the public, turning the Fraser into a marine highway could go a long way in alleviating congestion, pollution, and wear and tear on our roads. Arriving at a consensus is the next step in making the Fraser a true marine highway.
We're already going into the next step with the merging of the Fraser River Port Authority, the North Fraser River Port Authority with the Vancouver Port Authority. Through that leadership, there will be these key questions about short sea shipping and the role it can play.
It's achievable. The challenge is finding the players and participants, whether it's the Port Authority, the region, the province, or the Fed, to look at that.
You've been watching The Sustainable Region, and this show has been about industry. Whether it's on water or land, industry may seem removed from our daily lives, but when we look at the goods and services that we use every day, it's clear that industry plays an essential role. Let us know what you thought about today's show or suggest some story ideas. You can phone us at 604-436-6794 or email us at sustainableregion@metrovancouver.org. For The Sustainable Region, I'm Dagmar Timmer.
And I'm Vanessa Timmer. See you next time.